Maverick, go all the way down on your screen. Do you see?
I got it.
Got it. Okay. Okay, so what exactly is the MCAT? So MCAT stands for Medical College Admissions Test. It's basically the SAT of medical school. So it's a standardized test in order to get in. It will assess your critical thinking and knowledge of natural, behavioral, and social sciences, as well as principles prerequisite to studying medicine. So basically, it's how you get into either MD school or DO school, or one of the components that you need. Next slide, please. And what exactly are the components of the MCAT? So it's a really, really long test. You're in there from either 7:30 to 3, and I think this is a new thing, or 3 to 7, or 3 to 10:30 p.m. Oh goodness. And there's 4 sections to it: the biological and biochemical foundations, chemical and physical foundations, psychological, social, and biological foundations, as well as critical analysis and reading skills, also known as CARS. And, can you go back? Oh, never mind. And then each of these are divided into different amounts of questions depending on the section. And yeah, so for biological and biochemical, it'll test how well you know biological processes and pathways, such as growth, reproduction, and metabolism, as well as some cell biology, anatomy and physiology, and biochemistry. And these are some of the sample topics that you'll need to know. So embryonic development, G protein activation, citric acid cycle, etc. Next is Chem Phys, and this will test how well you know Gen Chem, organic chemistry, and physics in the context of living systems. For this one, I know that in physics and chem classes now, you bring a calculator with you into the exam, but for this, there's no calculators, so you have to be good at rounding and doing things like that, as well as a lot of calculations, so a lot of formula memorization, since you're not going to be given a formula sheet. So just some examples of some chemical reactions, some entropy, oh gosh, and then some gas laws, and some organic chemistry. Next is Psych-Soc, and this will test how well you know neuroscience, psychology, and sociology. And in addition to that, you're gonna also be given some experimental design questions to see how well you can do, or you understand how experiments and the scientific process works within the context of psychology and social science. So for this one, you'll cover your nervous system, some intro psych concepts like classical conditioning, and then Freud's stages of psychosexual development, as well as some public health stuff as well. And then last is CARS. This is basically the reading section of the MCAT. So if you remember the reading section of your SAT, it's pretty similar. So you'll be given 9 passages from either books, articles, things like that, and then you'll be tested on how well you understand it, either smaller details or bigger concepts. Topics usually include philosophy, cultural studies, and population health. And then next, how is the MCAT graded? It's basically this range from 472, which is the lowest, to 528, which is the highest. Each section is worth 132 points total, and you can get anywhere from 118 to 132 points. Unlike the SAT, there's no penalty for wrong answers, and then the raw scores are kind of graded on a curve. So then however many right you get, and compared to however many right other people get, will determine your score. And before I go on, is there any questions from the audience? If I'm going too fast, let me know. I think we're good. So next slide.
Oh, I can cover this, Melissa. Okay, so next, what is a good MCAT score? So I think this is helpful to know because it's nice to know what you're trying to go for and what your goal is. So I listed some of the more common schools that I was thinking of. So one, University of Hawaii, JAVSOM. So the MCAT total is a 511 and your GPA total is about a 3.74. So other schools kind of around that ballpark of 511 include like Creighton University, Drexel University, and these are also other private medical schools. So I listed UCLA there as well. So it's a bit higher. The average is about 517 with a 3.75 GPA. And one thing I wanted to note here is that state school medical schools heavily prefer their in-state residents. So for JAVSOM especially, they're going to prefer a lot more like Hawaii residences versus like out of state, especially the University of California system. So UCLA, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, like all of those schools are, it's really, really going to be difficult. So you're going to have to try to shoot for a really high MCAT score if that's kind of like your dream medical school. So the next schools here are AT Still, University of Health Sciences, and New York Institute of Technology. So these are DO schools. I don't know if you guys have a talk yet about the difference between an MD and DO, but MD and DO, you're going to be taking pretty much the same test, the MCAT, and it's two different licenses, but you're pretty much at the end of the day going to be applying for similar residencies. So yeah, just an alternative to definitely look into and have on your list when you're looking at schools to apply to. Oh shoot, go back.
Maverick, before you go on, there is a question asking why DO schools are generally lower than MD schools.
It is less competitive in a sense. More students are going to be shooting for MD programs, but DO schools are definitely growing in popularity because the licensing like rigor of that is started to be recognized as like the same as MDs, and now they're qualifying pretty much for the same residencies. So DO, it's kind of it's based on more preventative medicine, and it's more so like holistic in the sense that it's based on like mind, body, and spirit, versus MD schools are allopathic. So it's more so like medications based on like research and like surgery related. So the philosophy is a little different. But yeah, it's not, it's definitely something to look into. It's definitely something I wish I looked into as well. Okay, sorry. So next is the MCAT score distribution. I thought this was very interesting. So I listed here Hawaii relative to other states. So the MCAT average, this is for the Chem Phys sections, about 128. And then your overall total MCAT, for these are Hawaii matriculants. So these are people who got into medical school and ended up attending medical school. So it's about a 512. And from the last slide that I showed you, the average across the nation is about a 511. So that's kind of the score you want to be shooting for, at least. And then the GPA total is about a 3.77, which is pretty high. And then here, we kind of fall in the Asian bracket, which includes also like Japanese and Chinese. So definitely need some improvement in terms of the stats here. But I did want to show you that the total MCAT score is about a 513, which I think is a little higher than, because it's inclusive of all different types of Asians. And
so I'll cover the next couple slides.
All right.
So there's a lot to consider when you're about to take the MCAT. You know, it's going to be a very expensive, like probably one of the most expensive costs in applying to medical school. The test itself is $320. If you buy the Kaplan book set right now, it's about $175 on Amazon, but I think that's the discounted price. That usually goes up and down. And then you have like the official AAMC materials, which they're like, you know, essential, and that'll run you about $268. There are fee assistance programs, and so we'll upload these slides later, and that's like a clickable link. That'll go to like the actual fee assistance program by AAMC. But you need to be a US citizen. And I think like right now the threshold is like 400% or less than the 2020 poverty level in terms of like total family income. Rescheduling is a big thing. Generally, you want to reschedule if you don't think you're ready for the exam. And right now, because of like COVID times, you do get like a full refund if you schedule up to 8 days before your exam. Before, people used to like, they used to like really nickel and dime you, and you would, even if you like rescheduled, I think up to 8 days, you'd still have to pay, you'd forfeit your, you know, what you paid for the MCAT, and then you would take it later, regardless if you did good or not. Next slide. So like on the topic of retakes, and this is like pretty important. And this is like stuff that I wish I knew when I was applying back like 2017. You can take 3 MCATs in 1 year or 4 MCATs over 2 years. And you can only take 7 MCATs in your entire life. So if you screw up 7 MCATs, you can like, you know, no medical school for you. Your scores last 2 years. And most medical schools will take into account the number of retakes you do in addition to your score. So there's like, I don't know if like this is, I don't think it's been actually stated by, you know, AMCAS or by any medical school, but I think like the general consensus is the more MCATs you take, the less competitive you are compared to somebody who's achieved the same score in fewer attempts. But trend also matters. And so if you're applying to a school and you took 2 MCATs and one is a 502, but the next one bumps you up to like a 510, that looks really good. But if you take like 5 MCATs and you're like, you know, kind of messing around between 502 and 503 before finally getting your, you know, your stuff together and getting a 512, they'll take the 510 person before they even look at you. And then so there's also like the consideration of voiding your score. And so this is like where it kind of becomes like a game. You have to be like strategic about it. At the end of your MCAT, so like you finish 77.5 hours, you know, fly by and you're at the final screen, it'll ask you, do you want to void your exam scores? And so voiding basically erases your scores. You know, so this doesn't get put on your MCAT records, but the voided exam does count as one of your 3 yearly attempts or one of your 7 lifetime attempts. But the voided exam does not get counted by medical schools. Like the medical schools won't see it as an attempt. So, also another caveat to that is you don't get to see your score at the end of the MCAT. So you have to like, your decision to void is based solely on how you feel you did, which oftentimes isn't, you know, very accurate. And when you void your score, you don't get your money back. So you have to be really careful about this. So like I've kind of like, you know, I've spent a lot of time around pre-meds. So I've kind of compiled a list of failing mindsets that I'd want to share with you. And I hope none of you actually fall into these pitfalls. But so failing mindset number 1 is with all my extracurriculars, I don't have to study or study hard for the MCAT to get into medical school. So they kind of just treat it as like a formality. They just take it to get a score. And then they get like, you know, like under 480. Or like similarly, they don't do practice tests or they don't need to restudy for the retakes because they think that somehow just like a shuffle of, you know, questions will give them a point or 2. That's not how this works. The MCAT's not a test that you can game without any preparation, and each retake will be as difficult as the last. So this is something you have to take really seriously. It's probably the, like, you know, this is like the big filter after organic chemistry. It's the MCAT. Another mindset is I should save money by not buying blah, blah, blah. This is career defining. So expect to like shell out some money on retakes, on voided exams if you, if you really believe that you need to void your exam, on study materials, such as like the Kaplan books. Don't like spend like a discounted amount on 2016 Kaplan books, because they kind of get better and they revise with every year. So just buy like the latest one, and just don't like skimp on your future. Like don't shortchange yourself. And then practice test. A lot of people, they don't treat the practice test as they should be, which is you wake up at, you would pretend that that day is your MCAT. I used to wake up at 7, get to my desk by 8:30, and then do the entire 7.5 hours with no like personal pauses, no like pulling out my phone calculator. You're pretending that this is an MCAT, because if you take pauses or breaks whenever you want to, or you start at an hour that you're not, the MCAT doesn't actually start at, you're only wasting the 4 practice tests that you get. So you have to treat these practice tests as actual like exams. Next slide. And then so this one's a little controversial, is like I can work and have a social life while studying for the MCAT. Like we'll talk about our personal approaches to the MCAT, but personally I didn't have a social life, or I didn't work. I kind of put everything to the wayside and just like locked myself in my house with like some Hot Pockets for a month, and just plugged away at it until I got the score I wanted. So this will be kind of, you'll struggle for a little bit. Yeah, Dr. Binsai says so much of the MCAT is stamina. Yeah, so you need to get used to sitting and thinking for 7 hours. And that's the reasoning behind like these long dedicated study periods. And the last failing mindset is, I can't do it. I'm not smart enough. And you've all made it this far. You guys can do it. And you guys are smart enough. I've met, pretty simple people in medical school. Maybe it's just like a facade, but they made it. You guys can make it. It's fine. You just have to work hard enough. So we'll go into like how each of us tackled the MCAT. And so, yep, you have to work hard and smart. That's correct, Dr. Ganitano. Yeah, so mine is the pay attention in school method, because I feel like I did a 1 month or like 6-week dedicated study period. But when you do your study period, it should be a review of everything you've learned in undergrad. You can't really, I know some really remarkable people who have, who weren't science majors, and then they, took their prereqs and then they aced the MCAT. That's not me. Like I got my master's in cell molecular biology, and that kind of lends to your content, that makes your content review into a really fast review session. It's not like you're learning the content for the first time. So I want to stress like the importance of doing well in your basic science classes before you get into the MCAT, because that'll pay off. It'll like going through those Kaplan books, it'll all connect. And then you just have to learn how to take the test. So my main resources were the Kaplan books. There's like, 7. And then the official AMC practice exams and question banks. Those are essential. If you need more practice exams and question banks, Kaplan, Princeton Review, they all offer their own like third-party materials. Those are good, but sometimes they don't actually reflect the nature, like the true nature of the exam. Exam crackers. Yeah, same thing about exam crackers. I've heard like a lot of good things about exam crackers actually after Kaplan. But like I said, you want to make sure you really hammer those official AAMC materials, because that's going to reflect the test most accurately. I think I've heard like Kaplan actually inflates the difficulty of their questions. And so I've like known people who've, done the Kaplan question banks, and then they've well, it goes two ways. Like sometimes they do really good on the MCAT, or sometimes they just tank because the MCAT ends up being something that they didn't expect. So just like, I guess like just to lend my credibility, and this isn't a flex, this is just like so I can tell you how I did on the MCAT. I mean, it doesn't matter because I'm in medical school already. So it's not a flex. I'm just really stressing it's not a flex. I like scored a 515, and that's like in the 92nd percentile. And I fed my ego for months. And let me just tell you, those study habits that I did on the MCAT, they don't really translate to medical school that well. So your turn, Maverick.
Okay, mine is a little different. So my background was not molecular cell biology. It was biomedical engineering, but I was learning stuff for the first time, especially the social part for me. So reading the Kaplan books was so important. I think dedicating like a month and making sure like I highlighted and annotated I was going through the Kaplan books was super helpful. We also are going to have like another handout at the end of this presentation given to you guys with specifics of our scheduling and the resources that we used. But for now, I'm just going to say like Kaplan books, prime, official AMC practice exams, and the Q banks, prime. The practice exams, you want to save those. You only get 4. So if you want to space out and take more practice exams, I recommend, the Kaplan practice, the next steps practice. And if you want more Q banks, UWorld I heard is super helpful. I actually personally didn't do this, but I heard from friends that it had nicer explanations than Kaplan did a lot of the times because it had a lot of pictures. So if you're a picture person, definitely consider UWorld. It does cost some money, but again, I think it's going to be worth it. So the timeline for me, I decided medicine actually really late in the game. So that's why I did it my second semester senior year. So that's why I call it the hard way method, because I really just grunted through and spent all of my free time just MCAT review. And then I had 1 week of dedicated. I took 4 practice tests in my 1 week dedicated. And I ended up scoring pretty much around what my last practice exam was. And honestly, I attribute my score to the 1 week dedicated. Like I improved so much in that 1 week that what I want to say in that is dedication, like having dedicated time is so important. Having your brain kind of muddled in with stuff that's not relevant, like in your classes, it really hurts. And it might not feel like it at the time, but it definitely did for me. Just having, just if you can find time, like just separate yourself like what Austin did and just pull yourself in, dedicate the time for it, and it will really pay off. So in the end, I actually, because I took the test so late, I actually applied. I sent in my primaries without knowing my MCAT score. So that is a gamble. We can talk about that more when we talk about the application process, but just something to consider. So I said I did not consider retake. Truth be told, I was not even an option for me. So, okay, next.
Yeah, so for me, I had a background in biology, and I actually took a lot of courses that covered material that was on the MCAT. So I actually took several psych and social courses as well, and I thought those were really helpful in studying for that section. Regarding resources, kind of similar to Maverick, I also use Kaplan and the AAMC practice tests. But one thing I did though was I actually kind of spaced out my practice tests pretty evenly throughout my study period. So instead of kind of backloading it towards like when I would take the MCAT, I actually kind of like took one near the beginning, the other 2 kind of near the middle of my study period, and the last one like a week before I had the actual test. And that was kind of because I wanted to see like whether my scores were improving and just to kind of see like whether the trajectory was in an upward direction or not. So I think that was helpful in seeing like whether my study methods were effective or not, and kind of like dialing it from there. And the reason I kind of called the no free time method was because I kind of crammed my studying into like 3 months. So rather than like a full semester's worth of time to study, I was also taking college classes and shadowing at the same time. So I really did not have a whole lot of free time in between. So yeah, it was definitely like very busy period for me. And I also had like a 1 week dedicated study period, which was actually my spring break. So take it with what you will, but definitely allocate your time wisely when studying for the MCAT. And actually, one thing I wanted to just reemphasize was just to echo Austin's point about taking your practice tests, like simulating it like how you would take your actual MCAT exam. So I found, yeah, like make sure you really like find a quiet place to take it. You know, put your phone away, put your iPad and your other distractions away, because you really want to kind of simulate that test feeling experience as close as possible. And so regarding my results, it was a couple points lower than my target score, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I was kind of like, about it. Like it was still a objectively like a competitive score. It's just it wasn't like near. It was a little lower than like my final practice exam score. But I felt it was competitive enough to not consider retaking the exam. And fortunately, I was able to get interviews and matriculate with that score. So yeah, and Melissa, you can go.
Actually, sorry, could I make a note about taking the MCAT, the practice ones? If you're coffee drinkers, like consider also using the bathroom during the MCAT takes a lot of precious time away. So when you're taking your practice exams, take it as you would. Like if you're gonna drink coffee in the morning, and you really need that, like do it. And then consider though, like really look at like how many times you're gonna be using the bathroom in that time space. Yeah, something to consider.
Yes, or where it depends, like Austin suggests. But otherwise, yeah, take your breaks like how you would expect to take them on the MCAT. So like have your bottle of water off to the side, like pack your little lunch for during that little lunch break, and yeah, just kind of anticipate like how you think you're gonna like function, I guess, on that day.
Okay. I call my method the hybrid method because it takes a little bit of what everyone else did, and I also did not have a cool name. So my background is in biological sciences as well as a minor in like a humanities. I did Japanese, which I think is like really good for cars because you have to read a lot. So take those like non-science classes, do something other than science, and like it's a skill that you need to build, especially like also in med school because surprise, we read a lot of stuff. For my main resources, I did the Kaplan books and the practice exams and question banks like everyone else did, but I also took the Kaplan course. There's pros and cons to this. If you really need like that structure, then it's really helpful because they give you like hard deadlines of like you have to like finish reading this chapter before you get to class, and I was really bad at doing that. So but if you're like are good with scheduling, good with like following through with deadlines, it's really helpful. And also if you need like to learn those like study skills, um how you take tests, how you go through a standardized exam, because like the last time you probably took one was the SAT, it's also really helpful. But otherwise, if you have like that schedule down, if you don't need kind of like that hand holding, then I would say your time might be better spent just studying during, because it was like a 3-4 hour block every week. So if you don't need that extra like help, it might just be more beneficial to just schedule it on your own. And then my timeline was similar to Maverick's, where I had a semester to study, but then like Nick, I was also doing a lot of things during that semester. So a lot of my like big studying portions actually happened during either breaks or holidays. So all of my spring break and all of my Easter break was spent studying for the MCAT and like catching up on my schedule. And then after that, I spent after my finals, I had 1 month of just MCAT studying, and kind of similar to what everyone else did, where I spaced out my practice exams and then reviewed what I got wrong on like the previous exam, then studied for a couple days and took another practice exam, things like that. What else? I was actually really lucky because my older brother took the MCAT, so he was like my MCAT coach during that month. So if you have like mentors, like upperclassmen friends who took the MCAT, ask them for advice, and like they'll definitely be like your greatest cheerleaders during that part. My result, I think, because I like spent so long in my dedicated, and during that time I did the like simulating it for so long, I actually did better than all of my practice exams. I think I listened to my hype up playlist and was like kicked off my shoes and sat back and was like, let's do this. So I think I was like a bit more relaxed than I normally was during my practices, which was good. And yeah. So I guess biggest tip is definitely like have that dedicated time where you can just separate from school and just focus on the MCAT. Okay. Well, next slide, I guess.
Another question.
Sorry, Austin, what did you say?
Does Dr. Ganitano have a question? Because his hand is raised on the.
Oh.
To answer the question in the chat, anyone study in groups or just individually? I had friends who were like going to take the MCAT around the same time. So like we would like study together and that we would read our review books together, but everyone has their different strengths and weaknesses. So it wasn't like we did all the same content review at the same time. Oh, another thing that I did that I thought was really helpful is take a diagnostic test. One is offered through the Kaplan program, and you can probably find some other ones through other programs. I'm not sure if AAMC offers an official one, but that's really good to if you go into that test blind and just see like what am I good at, what have my classes already covered, what do I need to study on my own a bit more. I think that's a good way to like see that.
I personally did it individually. I don't think anyone else studies their senior year second semester. So I was alone.
I also studied with like one other person, but it was mostly like just to kind of keep each other accountable. It wasn't really like we would talk a whole lot during the study session. It was just kind of like to make sure that we weren't like getting distracted during like that time period where we said we would study. But if any questions came up, then it was kind of helpful to have someone there just to like bounce ideas off of.
Okay. So we're just going to show you guys some sample questions. I actually wasn't intending for us to go through this biology question, just because I wanted to save some time for like actual questions that you guys had. But the point that I wanted to show here is a lot of the questions, especially in the chem phys and the bio, are going to be based on passages similar to this. So you might occasionally have a passage and maybe one or two questions that are pretty much completely based on your knowledge, so on your Kaplan book reading. But majority of it is going to be based on your ability to read and comprehend the question and apply what you know and what you've learned from Kaplan into these questions. So yeah, I would say that it's the more difficult part of the MCAT. So we're just going to skip this for now so we can get to questions. But I would want to go through the next couple. So this, if you guys want to take the time to read this, and if any brave souls out there want to either put it in the chat or you could DM me as well, and I won't share your name, what they think it is. Anyone? Okay, thanks guys. I see. Okay, so D. Yeah, actually, I just have to read this one. It's true. I think it is D. Am I right, Austin? You actually put this one up.
It's in the notes.
I can't pull up the notes from here. Sorry.
Wait.
I
Go to the
didn't
next
think-
question. I'll figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, next
Can
one.
you go back to that question quickly though?
Yeah, go for it.
Basically with this question, do you see how like there's nothing, like no previous passage before it, nothing like that? So this is something where you would just have to know it.
Okay, next one is another just need to know. Same thing, chat. It's B. Okay, I've got one for A. Anybody else? A. All right, is that the consensus? Oh, okay. After concise is C. Okay. All right, so this is something actually me and Austin also got wrong initially. The answer is B. So it's an electron, so it's originally going to be pulled towards the positive plate, but once it leaves the electric field, it's going to be stuck on the path that it was first set. So yeah, B, I know. A, I thought so too, but oh. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to show you a passage. I'm going to time you guys. You're going to have 1 minute to read the passage. Okay, you ready? Okay, go. Okay, that was a minute. Any guesses for the answer for one? Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of them are very like philosophical like this. Any guesses, anybody? Okay, I've got a guess for one. Okay, someone guessed B for one, and B is correct. Congrats. Okay, and then any guesses for number two? Oh, you are correct. 100%. All right. Okay. Yep, and we have some essential resources here. And again, we have an LI handout to show you guys as well. Okay, but for now, any questions?
Can you stop sharing so we can just see everyone? There you go. One thing I want to say about cars, there's like different methods to do it. The method that I liked was skim really quickly to get like the main idea, and then the questions generally go in order. So like the first question would have to do something with like the first paragraph. So I just like followed along to like, it's kind of like where's Waldo for the answer. So you look for those keywords.
And on the contrary of like my chosen strategy for cars, and I found this like at some weird like Reddit post back in 2017. I tried finding it for you all, but I couldn't. But essentially, you want to, so it's like way different from what Melissa did. I would read the passage once in like a really loud and obnoxious storytelling inner monologue. And surprisingly, like you can actually read it, like the entire passage in like a good 5 minutes, and then spend like the next a couple minutes like answering the questions. And like that worked for me. So you might have to like really play around with it. It's the most finicky and most like I don't know, user tailored
Yeah,
section.
you can't really study for cars. You just
Yeah,
have to
you
practice
have to
reading.
treat it like a game.
I think for me, I would have definitely kept up with those Kaplan deadlines a bit better. I definitely fell behind on those. So having a schedule and sticking to it is super important, especially if like you have a date set already and it's near.
For me, it'd be having more dedicated time. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
And this can go out to anyone, but I think my situation matches up with Nick's situation the most, which is the like, I don't have time for anything kind of situation. Since I'm currently studying for the MCAT, but I'm also a full-time student and I work and I also have extracurricular activities as well. I was just wondering how you were most productive in your studying through your content review and going through like all the different parts that you need to study, but also in spaced review as well. So after maybe relearning something, if you haven't seen it in a very long time, and then how would you go about going over it again, maybe like a couple of days later or even a couple of weeks later?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think regarding kind of allocating time to study content, I would definitely give priority to the topics that you're least comfortable with. So like for me, I was strongest in like biochem, orgo, that kind of stuff. So I kind of put that to the side because I knew I would do well on it just because I had such a strong background in it. So then I would focus more of my time doing like cars, psych soc, chem phys. Because it sounds like from your situation, you're kind of crunched for time, you're doing classes and all that kind of stuff. You definitely want to spend that time working on the topics that you know you're weakest at. And I definitely recommend either like taking a diagnostic, like I think Melissa suggested, or using one of your practice tests to kind of get that baseline to see where you're at. And then in regards to kind of space repetition, yeah, I think that's a hard thing to do because the MCAT does cover so much. I think if you can kind of review the material in more than one way, I think that's good. So like definitely read the book, or whether you use like Kaplan, Princeton, whatever. But also try to see if you can find like question banks online or just other ways to see the topic, like whether that means like Khan Academy videos or other ways just to kind of see the content, because that will then at least kind of be like, okay, I've seen it before, but seeing it in a new way will kind of help to cement it in your mind. Yeah, I think that's kind of how I would suggest going about that. Hope that answered your question. If not, feel free to ask anymore.
Thank you. No, it did. I just learning or relearning content has been a bit difficult, but then I've tried experimenting with podcasts when I commute to work. So that seems to be a little bit helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I think there's another question.
Can I just add something to that?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Just like the MCAT is basically a culmination of all your pre-med classes combined. So there's no way to know everything on the exam. And like if you come across like that one thing that you just didn't study, don't worry about it. It's just one question. So that's another like piece of advice I would add to it. So you just know that you're not gonna learn everything to know on the MCAT. Again, and then you also have like med school to learn all of that too. So it's okay.
Yeah, and just kind of addressing a comment in the chat, you definitely want to kind of get your priorities in order when studying for the MCAT. So definitely, like if there's some extracurricular activity that you're not as invested in and you feel like is not very fulfilling or worthwhile to you, then you may want to put that on hold, at least while studying for the MCAT. That may help in the long run, I definitely think. Okay.
I also encourage, if you need more time, like taking a gap year is also like a really good option. And something that I did, I loved my gap year. And it
What
gives you
did
a
you
lot
do
of time.
during?
Oh,
What did you do during your gap year?
okay. So I majored in biomedical engineering. So I wanted to be an engineer at least for a little bit. So I was a civil engineer for my gap year. So yeah, I just had a job. Yeah, just like a little different. And
Did you work and study for the MCAT? That was pretty much your entire gap year.
no, actually, so I only took one gap year. So that means I had to have applied that summer. So I took the MCAT pretty much a week after I graduated. And then after all the applications for medical school, then I started just applying for jobs and then just worked throughout the gap year. Yeah. Right. I was gonna get us started on the next question, which is, what is your recommendation towards note taking and to what degree during content review? For me, I personally did not do any separate note taking. I did all of my annotations and highlighting in the Kaplan books. The one thing I would say I did take notes on were the incorrect things that I got wrong on my practice exams. Yeah, making sure that you know why you got it wrong and making sure like, repeat that. I think is super important when you take notes and then review. Anybody else?
Yeah, so I didn't take any notes either. I just like highlighted the Kaplan books, and it's funny because my girlfriend used my books after me and they were like disgusting, just covered. It's like I don't know how to highlight selectively. It's just like a painted book at the end. So she just went and bought her own set. But yeah, what Maverick said is really good advice though. After you take every practice exam, it's like 7.5 hours for each practice exam. And then I would spend like at least 3 to 4 hours that next day going over every question I got wrong. And in making sure I like nailed those concepts. On the AAMC like practice exams, they actually will stratify your like each question into different concept categories. And so it's easy to just go back and then find that category and then do a bunch of practice questions or really just like do a really solid review on that category before you test yourself again.
Yeah, I did the same thing as Maverick and Austin, except I made Anki cards for as I was reading through Psych Soc. So that was kind of like my note taking as I was making those cards. I wish I knew that there were pre-made cards available that saves a lot. Like making Anki cards takes a lot of time. So don't do what I did for that. But I think it kind of helped because I wrote it down. I'm the type of person that if I write something down, it'll help me remember it more. So like if I did take notes, it wasn't like to study off of, it was just to rewrite it. But like it never like I didn't make a study guide based on the study books, no. And then again, like doing the what's it called? The after you take your test, review it, go over it, things like that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh.
You can go ahead. I just have a question about Anki, and I was just wondering if most of you use Anki in medical school, and how does studying for the MCAT differ to studying in medical school? But I know that you're trying to answer that next question, so you can talk, Nick.
Oh, no, I can actually address your question and the last one kind of at the same time. So I wish I knew about Anki in undergrad, at least just for some aspects of the MCAT, like the psych social, because it is just kind of rote memorization at some points. So I think most of us here use Anki right now. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe not Austin. Okay. But yeah, it's good with learning facts and kind of, or it's good for, it provides spaced repetition. So you'll see something and then you can kind of answer whether you got it right or not. And then it'll come up later on again, that exact same card. So it's good in the sense that you can kind of cement like certain facts and things in your head. And I guess that's really helpful with medical school because you are learning such a large volume of content. It's not really necessary in undergrad. And even for MCAT, I wouldn't say it's necessary. But if you do find that spaced repetition is helpful, then you can give it a shot. Although I will say that there's a bit of a learning curve in learning how to use Anki because the user interface is not the best, I would say. And then regarding the previous question about note taking, so I did take handwritten notes, but only for like concepts. I did it very sparingly. So only for like concepts that I had difficulty understanding. I would just write it down, and similar to Melissa, it was not like to reference it over and over again. It was just kind of like cement it in my head. But yes, Anki, we can save that for a whole nother talk because that is a big thing.
I guess to answer the other part of your question, how studying for med school different than studying for the MCAT. The MCAT, I think Austin said it, it's kind of like a game. So you have to like do like that scheduling, that like strategic planning for it, versus med school is more like a marathon. So like after the exam's over, you like I'm guilty of this, like you shouldn't drop the content that you learned in the last unit, versus like MCAT is kind of like a study dump. You'll relearn it later when you need it. So I think that's my view on it.
Okay, to address that other question in the chat about if you're signed up for the MCAT and if you don't feel ready, coming from someone who pushed their MCAT back 3 times, I would recommend pushing it back. I think the number one piece of advice any of us could give you is don't take the MCAT if you're not ready. It's much cheaper to reschedule the MCAT than it is to have to retake it. It also looks better. They don't know that you rescheduled it. And then also coming from someone who took 3 gap years, it's okay to push it back. We'll all end up there someday, you know? So, but yeah, if anyone else wants to chime in and has anything else to say about that.
If you're like dead set on applying this cycle, I think school or the application like pushes through the beginning of July. So if you're comfortable with applying blind, you can probably take it up until mid-June. If it's like an April exam and you want to reschedule it. I took my MCAT on June 1st, which was like kind of pushing it, but it's possible. But again, like Paige said, there's no shame in a gap year if you feel like you need it. So do what's best for you.
Yeah, you definitely want to give yourself kind of the best odds or or the best shot at applying when you are applying that cycle. So, if you feel like you're not prepared at that point, then it might be better to just kind of take a gap year or reschedule the MCAT, because at some point, like when the application cycle opens up, then because the schools handle it on a rolling basis, then the earlier you get your stuff in, then the earlier they see it, then the earlier they'll send out their secondaries, their interviews, etc. So definitely you kind of want to make sure you plan out the timeline as well as you can. Yeah.
Next question, did anyone deal with family pressure in taking the MCAT and applying? Anybody here?
I had my brother as my MCAT coach, which again was really nice, but also his nagging got a little annoying sometimes, but he came from a good place. So there's like that kind of family pressure. My parents pretty much knew to leave me alone during my 1 month dedicated, just like supply me with food and then close the door. So it's really important to communicate with your family and friends that like this is something you have to do. This is like a very necessary step to get into medical school and becoming a doctor. And like people who really care about you will understand that. And if they don't understand that, then feel free to just ignore them for the month. You can make amends later if you want to.
We have another question. What is the best way to take the information that you've learned and apply to questions and problems? I think that one just gotta take practice questions. All the Q banks, as many Q banks as you can get through. Definitely almost mandatory to get through all the AMC Q banks, and then the supplementary ones like through Kaplan, through UWorld, through Next Steps. Get through as many as possible. The MCAT is just mostly just practice. It's habituation. Anybody else?
Agree. Just get in the habit of it.
Okay. And the last thing. One thing that we're loving about medical school. Who wants to go first? Let me think about that. Oh.
Really? Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'll just say.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. Okay. The content is very interesting. Yeah, medical school content. It's not like I felt like the MCAT was kind of a trudge to get through, but it's really interesting when you get to learn about the body and things in undergrad start becoming applicable and you start realizing why it's important to know like the Krebs cycle and stuff like that. Go ahead, Liz.
I was gonna say I really like the clinical stuff, like basic sciences are not my favorite. But like once you start applying it to like actual patients and like we have like fake patients that we talk to. So like once you have like a face to the name and like there it becomes more than just like processes rather than like an actual person that you're caring for, which I really like.
I think, like they said, the application of it all, and like, when you're in medical school, you're obviously like passionate about medicine, and being able to apply all these basic sciences and know that you're going to use it one day is pretty cool. And another thing that I love the like environment of it. Coming from like a big pre-med university, and all of you who are like pre-meds right now, you know it's kind of like dog eat dog sometimes. And when you get to medical school, everyone, the Lululemon discounts, oh my God, that's a plus too. But everyone in medical school, everyone is kind of like, we're all on the same team. We all want each other to do well. Like the pass fail type of grading system we have here definitely helps with like lowering the stress and makes it a lot more enjoyable, honestly.
Yeah, I think Paige brought up a really good point. Like it's really cool. Just like everyone who gets into med school is like, you deserve to be here. Like you're at a high level, and it's just really like motivating to be around people who are like so passionate, so willing to like go out of their way to do things. And yeah, it's just like a really like good motivator, I think. Like as much as we may complain about like midterms and tests and things like that, it's just awesome being like around students who are so like invested and motivated in what they're doing.
I'm still thinking of an answer. I really like learning, and I know it's a very cliche answer, but I feel like I am not ready to enter the real world yet, and I like to just kind of absorb everything and learn more about how things work and like and apply them in like clinical context. So like me and Melissa are in the home project, and we're like one of the few people who are actually seeing patients right now. And it is very fulfilling to learn something, or like mess around in like the anatomy lab and see like disconnect like the was it the glenochromial joint or something, and then like a couple days later I saw like a patient with like a dislocation in his like shoulder, and I was like, wow, that's something we're like learning about. And I think it's always like it's like mind blowing, and it's really gratifying. You can like help people with your your knowledge. So it's definitely something that's worth taking the MCAT for and doing all of this. Like I know it was a very intimidating talk, but it's worth it in the end.
Can I just share what one of my favorite things is right now as a physician, as a doctor? Just watching and listening to you guys, and you being a class, and you guys are all friends and supporting each other. There's going to be a day when you guys are going to be calling each other up for like legit help for a patient, like a real patient, right? So then my classmates now, you think of them as your high school friends. You were drinking, you were going through drama with their girlfriends and boyfriends and breaking up. Some of them struggled a little bit more. So you were really rooting for them and helping them try to pull through. And then now on this end, you're like head of the emergency department at Queens. They're doing crazy plastic surgery, like they're top plastic surgeon in Las Vegas. They're like running crazy things all over the country. And when you need help, you're going to be like, hey, Maverick, like, so say Maverick is ortho, like, hey, Maverick, like, can I send you a picture, like, of this arm? But like, what should I do? And she's like, oh, just do this. Like, cool. You just start doing it. And so the camaraderie and the friendship and everything that you've developed in your years of med school. And I look at the pre-meds now. And then when you guys get into a med school and then you become residents and then you become attendings, I'll be calling you for help. Okay, so it's going to be so much fun, guys. It's so much fun to be at this level where you're calling your friends for help. It's crazy. I'm done.
Okay. The last thing we wanted to share is our next workshop. So it's going to be a personal statement workshop. So after the MCAT, I would say it's like the next other important piece of your application. So I think we're going to have more information on Melissa. Do you guys have maybe a little bit more about that?
Let me look up the date again. Hold on. But basically, we're planning on giving you guys some like thought questions to help you like think through what you want to talk about on your personal statement. So one thing that was really helpful in my undergrad was that they gave us this worksheet that we had to fill out. That was basically like, why do you want to go into medicine, but broken down into like 50 questions. And I think that's a useful exercise. So we'll talk about like different components of the personal statement and then how to write it. And if I can find that date, sorry. I think we have it set for March 18 right now. Yeah.
Great. Okay, and then I will send you guys kind of this LI handout that Paige so nicely created.
You guys know what LIs are?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. It's a nice flyer looking handout with just more advice and tips from us. Yeah. Thank you everyone for attending. Yeah, hope to see you guys at the next one and hope this helps.
Thank you to PIMSA for hosting this event. You guys were amazing. If you guys want to hear more of their genius experience and all of their words of advice and wisdom, continue to come to the workshops that they'll be hosting for us. PIMSA is in partnership with PMAH, the Philippine Medical Association of Hawaii. I represent PMAH and the mentorship program. There's a couple of you here that we haven't heard of or met yet as pre-meds. If you're interested in mentorship from us or from the medical students, email us at pmahmentorship.com.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Good luck.
Thank you.